In this Board Game Addicts video, we are going to showcase Pillars of Heracles, a game that is currently on Kickstarter. It's important to point out that the rules and components of the game are subject to change until its release. In Pillars of Heracles, you control ancient city-states and your goal is to conquer as much territory as possible and bring your city the greatest glory. The game board is two-sided, so you can choose whether you want to expand along the Mediterranean or Aegean coast. There are 9 city-states in total, and you can always choose from the player number +1 at the start of the game, which determines your starting city location and your unique abilities throughout the game. There are no rounds in Pillars of Heracles, as you complete your turns one after the other, each consisting of 2 phases: status check and action phase. The first step is to check the current state, that is, check if you have a siege marker on the board. If you do, and you control the space, thus you have more power there than your opponents, and if that space contains a city controlled by another player, take control of the city. If this is resolved, skip the rest of the status check steps. In any other case, see if you dominate a space where another player has a pillar, building or city. If you do, move 1 space forward on the region's track. Then check if you control 3 areas marked with the same symbol. If so, move 1 step forward on one of the 2 tracks marked with the icon. The status check phase will not play a big role at the beginning of the game, but don't forget to perform it later on, as it can not only speed up the game, but also change the current power balance. Next comes the action phase, which can be either advance or replenish. If you want to advance, play a card from your hand and move along the rondel according to its numerical value. If you have moved to a space where another player has a marker, that player may draw a card from their deck. You can then perform the following 3 optional actions in any order. You can use the ability of the card you played to move on the rondel if you have one. You can move your units around the board if you have landed on a space of the rondel that does not have a crossed out movement icon. When you arrive in a new space, explore it, that is, flip the resource and population tiles. A land unit can move on land, board or disembark a ship, while ships can move to adjacent sea spaces or to a neighboring port. At the beginning of the game, you have 2 movement points per turn until you get more by advancing on the navigation track. Our third action is to implement the rondel action. With Procure, you can buy character and monument cards from the procurement area. Pay the cost shown on the card, and in the case of a monument, the extra marble or wood printed on the board, and take your new cards into your hand. Speaking of which, resources can be spent from 2 sources in the game. Each space contains a resource tile that can be used by covering it with a pillar placed in that space, or by playing cards that you have not used to move on the rondel. But let's return to the Procure action. When you buy a character card, you also have the option to exile a card from your hand or from your discard deck. With the Deploy action, you can recruit new units. After paying the recruitment cost, you can place different units in spaces controlled by you based on your buildings. You may deploy a hoplite in your city or citadel, a worker in your city or agora, and a ship to a sea space or harbor adjacent to your city or temple. You do not need to remember this rule by heart, as the corresponding units and buildings are located below each other on your player board. With Build, you can build cities and the aforementioned buildings in a space where you have workers, after, of course, paying their resource costs. A space can contain only 1 city, and an additional build rule for buildings is that you cannot have another building in that space, no other player can have the same building in that space, and you cannot have the same building in the region. The citadel represents 3 power in that space and can be used to recruit hoplites. The agora provides a discount of 1 resource of its territory for advancing through the tracks with the ascend action, and you may recruit workers in its space. Building a temple unlocks a slot for a mythology card in your player board, and you may recruit a ship next to it. Cities can recruit any type of units, and they are worth glory points at the end of the game. With the saddle action, you can place a pillar from your player board to a space where you have at least 1 unit present, and your power is equal to or greater than the power of the strongest player and the population tile in that space. If you also remove a population tile with this action, you also receive the reward on it. It's important to note here that if a row on your player board is emptied during the deploy, build, or settle actions, you can take a matching strategy tile from the supply and place it on your empty row. These tiles can provide various passive abilities, so it may be worth getting some as soon as possible. The Ascend action allows you to progress through the region tracks by spending resources. With each step you gain upgrades, such as new cards, cities, mercenaries, or even permanent abilities. The cost of a step is always the number of levels you want to get to, so from level 2 to level 3 you need to spend 3 resources. Since this means more and more resources as you progress, it may be worth paying with an amphora. One full amphora always means one step, regardless of your current level. After progressing through the tracks, you can choose to draw cards up to your hand limit, or you can replenish your pillars on the main board and energize your invoked mythology cards by paying the wine cost shown on them. If you cannot or do not want to move on the rondel, you must use the replenish action. You may discard cards from your hand and draw new cards from your deck to your replenish size. You can also replenish your pillars by removing them from the resource tile, making these resources available again. You may energize your mythology cards so you can activate them again. Whether you choose the advance or replenish action, you can take as many free actions as you want during your round, which can be the following. You may invoke a mythology card to use its effect by turning it sideways. You may do this once also in another player's turn. You can fulfill a prophecy. Each region has 3 different levels of prophecies, which impose certain conditions. If you meet the condition of the top card in the region, you may take that prophecy card at the end of your turn, but at most 1 prophecy per turn. You may place a siege marker on a space you control that has at least 1 unit on it and a city of your opponent. The end of the game can be triggered by 3 events. When a player controls 6 cities at any time in their turn. When the players have collectively reached the end of as many region tracks as the number of players. Or when 3 H3 prophecy cards are removed from the board. Once the game end is triggered, finish the current round and play 1 more full round, at the end of which scoring takes place. Players earn glory points as follows. Completed prophecy cards are worth 1, 2 or 3 points, depending on the age from which they come. 1 glory point for each monument card. Finally, check the control of regions and cities. Starting with the first player, each player may move 1 ship from a sea space to an adjacent region's land space, indicating that the power of that ship counts in that region. Ships in ports are worth 2 points and may not be moved. Each region is worth 3 points to the player with the highest power. Each city is worth 3 points to its owner. The player with the most glory points is the winner and will earn their worthy reward at the Olympus. The version we reviewed is a Kickstarter prototype, so the design is not final, but it's already pretty and gorgeous, and hopefully the components will be of the same quality in the final release. The game is language dependent, as the character and monument cards have short text on them, but the iconography is clear and you don't really need to dig into the appendix for explanations. The rondel-like action selection, the card play, and the negligible role of luck make it a strong Euro piece. The early feeling of I'm doing perfectly fine in my own little territory suddenly switches to menacing mode, and familiar elements from area control games pop up, so it ends up being quite a competitive game. With less than 4 players, the playing area is narrowed down, so conflict is inevitable at the end, but with 2 players, this resulted in only a few minor skirmishes in our style of play. The gameplay can be a little bumpy the first few times, due to the abundance of tiny little details, and it takes a few games to really get the core concept, but after that, the experience really turns smooth and fast. A word of advice: don't forget to exile the access cards when you get new ones. In addition to the standard gameplay described in this video, there are other variants in the rules, such as playing against barbarians who can destroy what you've built, or you can empower your adventures with legendary heroes, or engage in a more confrontational give and take where you can directly hit each other's units and buildings, not to mention the 2v2 team game mode and the solo mode. Finally, the theme is what really caught our interest. As for history lovers, this board game covers a truly fascinating era with plenty of familiar mythological creatures, characters and real-life locations, but also features even more lesser-known city-states and a terrific sense of how conflict could have erupted at any time over the decades and centuries between the many regional powers of the Mediterranean. We can recommend Pillars of Heracles to players with a keen interest in area control and historical themes, and also for those who care about the aesthetics of a game, but first and foremost to experienced players.